Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm taking a look at the new Altenew press plates that work with the Spellbinders Betterpress system. So let's get started. First of all, I'm going to have a brief look at the Betterpress system itself. I'm sure you've probably already seen it, but it consists of a top clear plate, which is called a platen, and there are some marks on there so that you know where to add your cardstock. On the platform itself, there is what is called a chase. This is the grey magnetic piece that you can see there. Underneath that are some shims, and these work really well to either add or remove depending on the thickness of the cardstock that you're using. So at the moment I've got all three in place underneath the chase. So the idea of letterpress is that it involves pressing a plate into cardstock so that you get an indented or a debossed look. This can be done with ink or without ink. So you can see here that I've used ink and I've pressed it into that cardstock. It is a little bit difficult to see here on camera, but if you kind of go over it with your finger, you can feel that it just feels lovely and smooth, and then you get that indented look where that image is. And you can see it a little bit better here on the one that I haven't used ink on, and this is using Altenew watercolor paper. So the new plates from Altenew, this first one here is called Dainty Flower. So you get 2 sentiments in the set along with 2 floral images. And then there's also one called Floral Engravings, and that consists of 1 large floral plate and then 2 smaller sentiments. This isn't the kind of proper packaging for these. I just want to make that clear that Altenew needed to get them out quickly, so they didn't send them in the packaging. I wanted to show you a little close-up look at the plates themselves. They've got a really soft feel to them. They are metal. They look a little bit like a hot foil plate, but they are different in that they've got lots of lovely etchings on them, and they've also got kind of like a seal over the top so that ink works really well with them, which wouldn't happen if you were to try and ink up a plate, like a hot foil plate. I haven't actually ever tried that, but I believe that it doesn't work that well, but you could definitely try it if you have a kind of hot foil system, but you aren't supposed to try it in this Betterpress system. So I've taken the floral engraving set here, taking this large floral image, and I'm just working out where I want it to be placed on my cardstock. So the thing with laying out these images is that you want to work kind of flipped over. So anything that you place on the left hand side will actually show up on the cardstock on the right hand side, and vice versa. So I've got a piece of paper here, and I'm just figuring out where I again want it to be placed, and just figuring out exactly where I want to add my tape to hold it in place on the platen. And again, I've got to remember that I want it in the opposite corners that I think I need it in. So I'm just kind of holding it down there. There are various different methods that you can use to hold down the paper, but I'm just using some yellow tape here and just adding it in those 2 corners. And once I flip this plate over to the correct way, I can see that the tape is in the right place. It's not going to get covered up by ink, although I am going to cut this piece down anyway, so I'm not too concerned. I'm then taking Pool Fresh Dye ink and I'm pouncing that onto the plate. This is a new ink from the Deco Garden collection. It's absolutely beautiful. I love this shade of Aqua. And so I'm just kind of pressing the ink pad into the plate, and I wanted to leave this at real time. The only time that I have cut it is when my head's got in the way, but otherwise I wanted to show you here how long it took me to ink up this plate. And the reason for this is because I'm going in very, very lightly. I would rather take my time and go over this multiple times to make sure that I get enough coverage than add too much, because I have found personally that it's really easy to add too much ink. So I can then add the platen on top, and then I can run this through my die cutting machine. And again, I'm going to show you this in real speed because I am running it through very, very slowly. I have found that I get much better results if I run it through slowly than if I run it through quickly. So I'm just taking my time here to run that through, and then I can remove the system from my die cutting machine and place that back down onto my work surface. And then those magnetic plate like pieces on either corner have held that in place, and then I can just lift that up, and I got a really lovely impression. I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I'm just going to bring it a little bit closer here so that you can see, and I think you can really see that kind of indent or the debossed look with these inks. And what I thought I would do is I would ink up the plate again and then rotate it so that I've got the image on the other corner. So this time I'm inking this up a little bit quicker. Again though, I'm going in really lightly with this ink. These are quite a firm pad, which is really nice, and I found that that works really nicely for these plates. And I do believe that you kind of want a higher viscosity of ink as well. These fresh dye inks are a little bit thicker than the original dye inks, and so they do work really well for this particular process. So I can just lift off the platen there, and you can see I think I actually got a better impression the second time around than the first time. I think I inked it up a little bit better, but I still think that looks really pretty. I'm then just cleaning the platen with some archival ink cleaner. This is the cleaner that Spellbinders recommend to clean the plates and also the system in general. And then I've got some magnetic tweezers here, and I'm just lifting off that plate. I find this the easiest way to try and lift those plates off. I find that they do stick really well to that magnetic chase otherwise. And I'm just cleaning this with a microfiber cloth that's already got some of the archival cleaner on it. For my next press, I wanted to use black ink and do some colourful ink blending on top. So I'm inking up the same Altenew Floral Engravings press plate, but this time I'm using the ink that comes with the Betterpress system. Altenew are releasing jet black fresh dye ink today, and I have tried that and it works really nicely, but I am going to add water to this, and so I wanted a waterproof ink, and the jet black isn't waterproof, whereas this one is, so that's why I'm using this one. I'm just inking that up really well, but again very lightly. And I'm going to place the platen on top, and it's going to hold in place with those magnetic pieces on either corner, and then run that through my die cutting machine. And again I'm running that through slowly, and then I can lift off the platen, and I really love the impression. I think this plate is just so pretty. I did get excess ink onto the platen, so I'm going to make sure that I clean that off really well. For my last impression today, I'm very much experimenting. I'm using the Dainty flower press paint. I have removed one of the shims underneath the chase because the black watercolour paper that I'm using is very thick. I'm then inking up the plate using rose gold pigment ink from the Amy Tangerine line for Altenew. I'm being really careful here, even more careful than I was inking up the other plates, because this has more of a foam pad to the ink pad rather than felt, so it is quite easy to over ink this, and so I'm, like I said, being very careful. I'm then running that through my die cutting machine, and I think the metallic ink just looks so beautiful against the black watercolour paper. I don't think it's a perfect impression. I think if I wanted a perfect impression, I would have been better off maybe just hot foiling it, which you can do with these press plates. So now I have my panel here that I have pressed with the black ink, and I want to add some ink blending on top. So I'm using the new Altenew Golden Sunset Fresh Dye Ink collection. This has already been released as a crisp dye ink collection, and they've now brought it out in the fresh dye ink line. So these inks, as opposed to the crisp dye inks, are higher viscosity, so they are a bit thicker, which makes them work perfectly for press plates, funnily enough, but also They just work really nicely for stamping in general, and they also blend really beautifully. So I'm using an Altenew ink blending tool here. This is one of the small ink blending tools, and I'm going in with the lightest shade first, and I'm kind of fading that out to white at the top. So that's the sun ray colour. I can then go in with chamomile and just adding that more towards the bottom. And then I can go in with snapdragon. And then I can finish off with terracotta at the bottom. What I did find though with the press plates is that you do lose a little bit of the kind of vibrancy, I suppose, of the black ink when you add the ink blending on top. And I found to counteract that, a great way is to add a little bit of water on top, which is why I wanted the waterproof ink. So I'm taking the Altenew fine mister bottle and I'm just adding very light sprays towards the bottom of this panel here, and I think it just helps to kind of meld it all together and brings out that black ink a little bit more. I'm not sure why, but it seems to work. I have set that panel aside to dry, and once it's dry I've added some instant dimension foam tape onto the back, and I'm adhering that down onto an A2 size white card base. So that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I've then stamped a sentiment from the Altenew Sentiment Strips stamp set, and I have heat embossed that, so I've stamped that down onto some black cardstock using Altenew Embossing Ink, and then I've added pure white crisp embossing powder on top. I'm using a T-square ruler and some tweezers to help me place that down as straight as possible. I can then remove the backings off of the foam tape on the back of the other part of the sentiment, and then I can place that above it. I did think about adding some embellishments to this card, but actually I really liked having the focus of the card on that letterpress look. And although it, like I said, it is a little bit difficult to see on camera, I think in real life it shows up really beautifully. For the second panel that I created with the pool ink, I simply cut that down into a smaller panel and pop that up onto an A2 size white card base with some foam tape, and I used the same sentiment in the centre. I really love just having that focus be the letterpress look. And then for the rose gold one, I simply just added that towards the bottom left hand corner of a panel and used that same sentiment. And I've got a couple of extra projects here to share with you that I will be sharing on my blog tomorrow. So I did some ink blending on these as well, and for the sentiments on this card and also the tag, I foiled the sentiments using the hot foil system. So I foiled them with white foil onto black cardstock, and they worked really nicely. And I just used the Golden Sunset inks for this tag, and I used the Deco Garden inks for the card. I really love that letterpress look, and I think it works really nicely, especially for clean and simple cards. This video is part of a hop to celebrate the new Altenew release, so I will have a link to the next person in the hop in the description bar below. I will also have links to the products that I shared in the description box as well, and over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.